Hey, you're watching GearWire.com. I'm Owen O'Malley. We're back with Vincent van Haaff, and we are now. What's this studio? What does the studio mean to Waterland Designs?
The first studio that was actually conceived from the standpoint of non-dungeon feelings. The open air, free dissipation of sound from at that time the much already larger dual woofer loudspeakers that were available in the late 70s. And here you can see that the ceiling is going up in the same kind of free form that we saw at the other little studio. The essence of that geometry is, this was the first room where I employed this kind of design. The back of the room has, instead of the cotton balls that we were talking about earlier, diffuse surfaces. There's some cotton balls behind that again, but that was in the era of erring on the side of caution, in a sense. Otherwise, the big difference is, of course, that this, as a full-fledged, multi-purpose professional recording studio, has the multi-channel automated Neve mix board. And a much larger live room that, again, for purposes of flexibility, can accommodate anything from a band to from a full-fledged even string sweetening dates to individual artists. This was a studio, for example, I mean, it's how ancient it is, where song Friends was recorded. Burt Bacharach and Stevie Wonder, of course, Dionne Warwick, Elton John, Carol Bayer Sager, engineered at that time by Mick Gazowski, one of the A names in recording and mixing. That was a live session. I mean, that actually was just a full one day, one night session with Elizabeth Taylor and Michael Jackson sitting on the couch over there.
What kind of feedback did you get from the recording artists when they came back and listened in this room?
In the beginning, because it was such an unusual shape, people would be insecure about what they would take out of here, and then eventually they would notice that there were more and more platinum albums being recorded here, so it became the place of choice for many years. This was originally built in 1978, and then expanded out, and we did modifications through the years, as well as the many additions that came along with the success of the recording studios. There are now, instead of just one room, 3 rooms, one mix suite, and then a much larger live recording room next door here as well. And well, to go back to your question, is that once people started realizing that it was a lucrative place of work, that and people like Gazowski and later on, now at this point, Nate Kunkel, people that actually are really at the tops of their recording and mixing skills, would make this their place of choice. In fact, I remember that Nate Kunkel at some point was assistant engineer here, like I started, which was fun.
So, could you talk a little bit about the design of the diffusion panels? Like, what was the inspiration behind that? Was there any sort of other example you were working off of, or how'd that come about?
From the theatrical design that I brought along with me, I had learned that was important to introduce scattering and diffusion in a listening room, whether that be a theater or, in this case, a stereo hard center type of mixing recording control room. And there is actually really no example of this type of diffusion panel, so I made it up. I said to myself, well, we need scattering in the mid-range in the rear of the room. I had a fair idea of what frequencies I was looking for, and I'm looking in this case for a fairly wide Q diffusing panel rather than a narrow band type of absorber. Mm-hmm. So these little panels are all set at slightly different heights, and it's essentially as if you throw the dice and you know, over and over again make more and more random numbers.
A little trial and error.
A little trial and error.
Yeah.
Although I think the panel was put together in like 2 afternoons, but you know, after a drawing that I basically did throwing the dice.
What about physically about the design? Actually, you can control the actual bandwidth and the actual frequency selection of the diffusion?
Yeah, you certainly can, because the depth from the rear reflective surface to the standoff and the little domino type of panels that you see here, there is actually very small variations that answer to frequencies that you can calculate, that you can predict. And that same thing has happened since the Greek times, you know, the amphitheaters, where they actually would know how to control the sound and reflections within the theater, and they would augment that with panels. Right. Fancy name for those kind of panels in the Roman theater was, or the Greek theaters even, probably Sumerian before that, was a Periaktoi, and it basically meant that there were a couple of people standing on side stage with these kind of diffuse-like panels, as sculpted panels, and they would actually direct the actor's choice toward the audience. So the you know, little sandwich board kind of guys, with fairly large panels that they would have to turn to
dynamics control.
Dynamics, volume control in the amphitheater. So I mean, this goes back centuries, many centuries.